would you say that glucose alone, not even just from like refined sugar, but carbohydrate ingestion, period, an elevation of blood glucose is toxic to the body, even if it doesn't elevate it too much?
It is toxic to the body. And the thing is you have to remember is that, you'll get sort of a spike and a drop. And so even if you're insulin sensitive and, you can get that down to a normal blood sugar level quickly, you're still elevating it up past the point that your body can really contend with the damage and stay on top of it. So, you have this sort of spike up and then it comes down, spike up and comes down, spike up and comes down. Okay, well, it's calculus 101. What's the area under the curve? The area under the curve underneath those big spikes, over where you should have over 100, on your blood sugar levels over 100, like, that's causing damage over that. Okay. So you can calculate all of that. So now that's not as bad as if you have insulin resistance, you have diabetes, and your blood sugar is always at 130, 140, and then it spikes up to 200, things like that. The area under the curve is much, much, much larger at that point, but it is always causing harm, even though it comes back down again. Um, I have heard that, well, certainly when you have high blood sugar levels, your body needs to get that out straight away, and that's why your insulin goes up. The thing is that insulin is not designed to be at that level. People think it's like, "Oh, well, you eat carbohydrates and your insulin goes up and it drives into the cells, and that's a normal reaction." It's a normal reaction down here at normal physiological levels. But when you're eating super physiological levels of blood sugar or of glucose, and that's getting super physiological levels of blood sugar, you have to raise your insulin to super physiological levels. That is a problem. If it was only that it just sort of it only drove energy into cells, then all you're dealing with is that area under the curve. Okay, all right, well that's more manageable, but that's not the only thing that insulin does. Insulin is an extremely important and very busy hormone, and it affects basically all of your other hormones, and it affects hundreds of other physiological processes in your body and your brain. And so the simple act of elevating your insulin levels to contend with these high levels of blood sugar will get all of those physiological processes in your body and your brain completely out of balance and will completely disrupt your hormones, which is why when people go ketogenic, they go keto, especially carnivore, because plants have hormonal disruptors as well. So you get rid of the hormonal disruptors and you're dropping your insulin down. So you have normal sort of baseline metabolic hormonal physiology. You see people's, insulin blocks estrogen production in women. It blocks testosterone in men. It blocks growth hormone in both men and women. So when you get rid of all that, you'll see testosterone improve in men. You'll see estrogen improving in women. It's, high insulin levels are the leading cause of PCOS, polycystic ovarian syndrome, because it blocks a conversion of testosterone into estrogen in women's ovaries. And so now you're getting too high of testosterone, too low estrogen. You get the flip of that in men, and
Mhm.
it's blocking growth hormone in both. So you get this complete imbalance. And so I've tested thousands of people's blood tests when they're just on a normal standard diet or even a vegetarian diet or a clean omnivore diet. And then you put them onto a clean whole foods ketogenic carnivore diet, massive improvements in their hormones, their metabolic system, and their nutritional status. So, there's that argument that, when you have your blood sugar up, your body desperately needs to get that out. And when insulin goes up, it sort of changes how your body is able to use different energy sources. And so because it's just desperately trying to get this out of your system. However, if you have somebody who has whatever on their blood sugar and there are ketones available, your tissues will preferentially use the ketones. It's just that when your insulin is up, it suppresses ketones, so you can't make them. So you don't have them. But it's done studies like if you look at like people giving exogenous ketones and you have blood sugar available, you don't have ketones available. You give them exogenous ketones, your brain will take up those ketones. Your heart will take up those ketones. Your intestines will take up the ketones. Your muscles will take up the ketones, right? And so that's actually a preference. Your body wants that. Now you get really super physiological. That's going to sort of change things. Right? Your body's really going to try to suppress ketones so you can get rid of all these carbohydrates as quickly as possible. And there can be competition for the energy dynamics. The people talk about like the Randall cycle and things like that, which is a very complex pathway. It's sort of very little understood for most people. And it's not something that I'm even like fully on top of, because I just sort of sidestep it and just be like, well, just don't eat carbs and it just
Mhm.
doesn't matter,
Yeah.
and So, what we do know that when you have when you're in a sort of so-called fasting state. Now, you mentioned how I don't think that is a fasting state. Call like a ketogenic diet. No, it's a fasting mimicking. No, it's not. Fasting is mimicking the metabolic state that you should be in all the time. And so you're in that metabolic state whenever you eat anything on earth except for carbohydrates. So I eat, 5,000 calories in ribeye. I'm not fasting. Whatever you can say about my metabolism, it's not a fasting metabolism. Right? And so fasting just mimics that. All fasting does is it's not that you're not eating, and that's why you're in that metabolic state. You're not eating carbohydrates and raising your insulin. That's why you're in that metabolic state. So if you just don't eat carbohydrates and eat anything else on earth, you will still be in that metabolic state. So in fact, it's now switching. It's not even being called a fasting metabolism or a fed metabolism, fed and fasting metabolism, which is what it was 24 years ago when I took biochemistry. My niece just took biochemistry at the University of Washington in Seattle, and she was telling me, it's like, yeah, they don't call it that anymore. It's just called a carbohydrate metabolism and a non-carbohydrate metabolism, which is much more accurate.
Mhm.
And so in a non-carbohydrate metabolism, you're making ketones, but it's not. I think ketosis is a bad name for it too, because the defining principle of it is not just that you have ketones.
Mhm.
It's that you're able to make ketones, but you're accessing your fat stores.
Yeah.
That's the main defining principle. You either can access your fat stores or you can't. And so that's the metabolic state difference. Your insulin is down low, so you have all these different metabolic changes happening that are normal, and you're not suppressing all of these things. And one of those things is ketone production. But that's not the only thing. That's just this one small part of this broad picture. So when you're in that state, in that non-carbohydrate state, you make ketones, but you also make blood sugar. So your blood sugar will always be normal. In fact, have much better blood sugar control, much more stable. As like a diabetic, will be much more stable on a CGM when you're on a ketogenic state, when you're on a ketogenic diet, a non-carbohydrate metabolism. But everybody will have better um, um, blood sugar levels, and so when you're in that state and you're making ketones, your brain preferentially runs on those ketones. And people are like, well, that's an alternate backup source just when you're starving. But again, you're not starving.
Mhm.
It's just you're not eating
Right.
carbohydrates. And now your body's running on those ketones. And in fact, you can give people exogenous ketones and the brain will take up those ketones, right? In lieu of the carbohydrates. So even though so just because you're making ketones, it doesn't change anything. Oh, you need to do that as a backup energy source. That would only be the case if you had no blood sugar, if your blood sugar was zero, but your blood sugar is not zero.
Yeah.
When you're in a non-carbohydrate metabolism, you make blood sugar. Blood sugar is 84 all the time, or in other parts of the world, 4.5. Just bam, right there, right? And so it's perfect. So you're making all the blood sugar you need, but now you have ketones available as well, and your brain is choosing the ketones over the blood sugar. You have blood sugar available, but 2/3 of your brain will only run on ketones. There are parts of your brain that will still run on glucose, but it's a much smaller amount. At any given time, you only have 4 grams of glucose in your entire circulatory system. And that's all the glucose your body needs for every single physiological process of your body and your brain, right? Just 4 grams. That's it. And you'll replenish that as you go. But you only have about 4 grams in normal non-diabetic levels. Diabetes is just 1 extra gram. 1 extra gram is diabetes. And so 1 extra gram is a toxic dose of glucose to your body, and your body responds to it as a toxin by trying to detoxify it by raising your by raising your insulin. And so just 1 extra gram is diabetes. And yet we're eating hundreds of grams of
Mhm.
carbohydrates a day, and we think that that's good and our body's desperately trying to keep this under 4 grams. And eventually it can't. And again, you're getting that area under the curve, you're getting those spikes. Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia, Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass fed and finished pasture raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another your specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. Yeah, there's a lot of problems with that, but it's yeah, when you're eating carbohydrates, it's toxic to your body, and your body is trying to get rid of that. But at the same time, carbohydrates are not the primary fuel source. When your brain and your body have ketones available, they preferentially go for the ketones as well. Like I said, ketones freely pass through passive transport through the placenta into babies. 51%, 54% of the calories in breast milk are from fat. So where do you think that's going? It's turning into ketones. It's turning into fat oxidation. So the predominant energy source for kids, even though there are carbohydrates in milk, the predominant energy source is fat, and so it's going to be fat oxidation to give those kids that energy. So that's our predominant and primary energy source for all of our tissue, pretty much. There's some exceptions, but the predominant um, yeah, predominantly, it's fat oxidation and ketones.
I agree. I agree. You mentioned PCOS, and that's one of the reasons why I fell into ketogenic diets in the past was because I was dealing with some women that they were infertile, they couldn't get pregnant.
Mm.
And what I noticed with women with PCOS was they would have facial hair. So they would
Mhm.
grow facial hair, too many
Yeah.
androgens, and then men, they would develop gynecomastia. They would get bitch tits,
Mhm.
essentially, man boobs.
Yeah.
So that was a real light bulb moment for me. I was like, oh shit, this is like it's almost flip flopping the sex hormones
Mhm.
right here. This is a problem. And then
Mhm.
you also mentioned um, electrolytes earlier. This has probably been the only thing that I've run into issues with. So maybe you can clear this up. Energy's through the roof. Um, I'm not dealing with like some knee pain that I was having before when I ditched the last little bit of fruit. It literally felt like the tissue around this joint was sticky. So I don't know if that was actual just glycation or if I was dealing with some oxalate dumping. But the major issue for me, I know when you're transitioning to a ketogenic diet, your insulin's going to come down. You're going to be excreting more water, more sodium as well. Cramping. I get some really nasty like leg cramps or even like in my triceps. I was doing some bench pressing earlier today, and these are pretty intense cramping. And then also some palpitations, which once I started implementing some more magnesium in my diet or supplementing a little bit more, because I've heard that people like Bella, they don't salt their food. I believe that you've mentioned that you don't salt your food either. Is there an initial period when people are transitioning into a carnivore or a ketogenic approach where they may need to supplement with some
Hmm.
electrolytes?
Yeah, yeah. So that's a good point. Is that like I sort of alluded to that in the Supernova trial where it was sort of a flawed study. They only gave people a sort of a week or two to sort of adapt, and they tested them, and that they had electrolyte imbalances and things like that. And that's where that comes from. So insulin is influential to your sodium reabsorption in your microtubules in your kidneys, and so that affects these sort of uh, these receptors that then will draw in more or less sodium. And so but the thing is, it's a balance. I mean, the thing is, if you get hypernatremic, meaning that your sodium levels are too high because you're eating a whole bunch of carbs, your insulin's just going higher and higher and higher past physiological state. I mean, you're not born with insulin resistance. I've had patients that have had, 5, 10 times the normal limit of fasting insulin levels. And then, when they eat, it's going to jump up more than that. So obviously, at one point, they weren't making that amount of insulin. It's not like they had like an insulinoma, a tumor just pumping out too much insulin their entire life. Not in this case anyway. And so that's obviously something their body had to adapt to. Now, if their body wasn't able to adjust and their insulin was going higher and higher and higher, and you're just sucking in more and more sodium, and their body wasn't able to do anything about that and excrete more and sort of match that sort of inappropriate reabsorption of sodium and be able to excrete the right amount of sodium, you'd die. You'd be dead, right? Because hypernatremia, high sodium levels, will kill you. Get very confused, your brain starts to shut off, and you go into a coma, have seizures, and die, right? So That's really important to have normal homeostasis. It's extremely important for your electrolytes to be in a certain range. And and so if your insulin's sort of going up steadily over the years, your body, your kidneys are sort of adapting to that, and they're going to excrete more sodium as a result of that. Okay, so what happens when you go into a ketogenic diet? You know, you're not slowly coming down over years and decades, right? It's a sharper transition, and so you're sort of pulling the rug out from under your kidneys. You can sort of think of it like that. It's a sharp change, and I find actually that most people do just fine, that their kidneys will adapt and will sort of change over. Now, you can lose too much though, because if you're all of a sudden your insulin's just dropping, quite quickly, and your body's not quite adapted back the other way around, it's going to take a bit of transition time. But you can think of that as part of being keto adapted. Um, that can make a difference. And, normal people just living a normal life may not really notice it. Call it a keto flu. People sort of feel a bit off for a couple of weeks or something like that. That can be part of that. It's also withdrawals, withdrawing from sugar, withdrawing from carbs, and getting these plant toxins out of your system. You're going to have a withdrawal effect from that as well. But it can also be from electrolytes, and you can have too low of electrolytes. You can lose too much sodium. Water follows sodium. And so if you're losing too much sodium, you're also going to lose too much water and you're going to dehydrate yourself. That's typically where the cramps come from. It's not necessarily that you're actually clinically low on your electrolytes. It's that you lost the electrolytes and you lost water with that. And so having a bit more electrolytes, replacing that and replacing the water will help you sort of rehydrate yourself and sort of retain some of that water. And and so, yes, some people find that. One thing that a telltale is anyhow, you can feel pretty rotten or maybe not have as much of an athletic performance as you normally would. You can try adding in some salt and certainly increasing your water. That's the key there, is increasing your water, and see how that affects you. But also, you people find that they actually get hypovolemic, meaning that their blood volume goes down a bit because there's less water in there. They're just dehydrated. And so if you stand up too quickly, you get that sort of a head rush. It can happen much more frequently. And so if you're standing up and you're regularly getting like, oh, sort of a dizzy, lightheaded, you're almost certainly dehydrated because of lack of electrolytes. So add in the electrolytes, add in more water in particular. Most people find that just adding in the water, just drinking a lot more water when you start getting cramps will solve that. If you drink, you know, now you can get, so that'll cover 98% of people. So the first thing to do is just drink more water, right? There is the 2% though, where it could be like an electrolyte imbalance that you actually have to supplement with significant amount of electrolytes. Like if you're too low in your magnesium, that can cause cramping. Serum levels of magnesium are extremely inaccurate. Your serum only has about 1% of your total magnesium in your body. The rest of it's being sequestered in your cells, your bones, etc. And so what's in your bloodstream is not necessarily indicative of what's in the rest of your body. It's like an analogy that I heard someone use was if you took 100 people and you asked them how much money was in their wallet, that doesn't tell them how much they have in the bank or their investments or what they own in their house, right? It's just what they have in their wallet. So you're not going to be able to distinguish, what their net worth is, right? Based on that. So that's sort of like looking at your magnesium levels in your serum. A better way of doing that is looking at your red blood cell levels of magnesium, where they actually break open the red blood cells and look at how much magnesium is in the cells. And that's more closely related to the rest of the magnesium that's in your other cells and in the rest of your body. And that's more accurate. Still not very accurate, but you can just trial and error. If your RBC level is suboptimal, and because most of these reference ranges are brought up, but they're just averages for the community. They're not actually an optimal reference range. That's why if you go to every single lab owned by a different company in your own town, they will have different reference ranges because it's a different group of people came in that they made an average from. And it's not healthy people they're looking at. They're just looking at any random person that came in for a blood test that walks through that door. Some will say, okay, well, we have normal BMI and people with normal BMI and people with between this age range or something like that. But even then, you can have normal BMI and still have diabetes, cancer, autoimmunity, and all these other sorts of things, and nutritional deficiencies and all that sort of stuff. You have a normal weight 25-year-old vegan. I would not use their B12 levels to get an average because they're going to be deficient, unless they're copiously supplementing, right? and even then, they're probably still low. Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. Those levels are a bit inaccurate. So typically you want to aim for the high end of normal, if not even a little bit above on certain things, and depending on the reference range. But there are optimal reference ranges that have been looked at, and so that those are the ones I use in my practice. But you know, if you are sort of below those optimal reference ranges, you could try taking magnesium, see how it makes you feel. Certainly in the first few weeks, being, you know, aware that you could be low on salt and that could be impacting your energy levels and especially athletic performance. So if you're an athlete, I always just tell people just to salt to taste, and usually your body will tell you, how much to do. But if you're finding that you're not getting, you're sort of a bit flat and you're sort of, you're cramping or whatever, A, more water, but B, you could need more salt than that. So some studies have shown on ketogenic diets, especially in athletes, that during that transition period, that adaptation period, you might need as much as 5 to 7 grams of salt per day to account for that. Electrolyte loss and replace that as well. So, some people do, and you just sort of play it by ear. I usually tell people just to salt to taste. Me, salting to taste is no salt at this point. It just doesn't taste good to me anymore. It just tastes too salty, which sort of sucks because like can't really eat bacon anymore because it just tastes way too salty. Yeah, it
Mm,
sucks. Yeah, so that one was a hard loss for me, but um, early on, I salted much more than that. I salted pretty liberally. A lot of people, Bella, she learned this from the long-term carnivore people and like they usually call it zero carb. Before it was called carnivore, it's called zero carb. It's really just zero plant. And their teaching was no salt at all because it can actually change your hunger signals. You can actually overeat and it can taste good even when your body doesn't want it and you overeat and things like that. And you can have other sort of problems. It's not going to really cause blood pressure issues for most people. It's not going to cause heart failure or any of that sort of stuff that has been sort of implicated in that's not really the case. There are some people that are a bit sensitive, and you'll notice that they have some salt in their blood sugar or blood pressure will pop up. When people are hypovolemic and their pressure is low, we give them salt water, saline, and things like that to bolster up their blood pressure and things. And you give them salt, it will increase their blood pressure and things like that. So there's that effect, but typically people won't get hypertensive to the point that they need medications just from adding salt to taste, typically. But there are people that are salt sensitive like that. Um, but yeah, that's a pretty typical one. And so Bella would have done that way, just no salt whatsoever. You might run into transition issues. Eventually, your kidneys will adapt and will be able to balance out how much sodium goes out because again, if you get that balance wrong and you get hypernatremia because you're pulling in too much because of the insulin and your kidneys just can't adapt that direction, you'll die. Now, if they're adapted that way, they'll have to be able to adapt back because if your insulin goes down again, well, then you're going to get hyponatremic and you'll die then too. So your body is able to readjust and adapt, but it can take time. And so, especially early on, if you're finding that you have a performance drop or energy levels or cramping or whatever, try it. Keep electrolytes in mind, and keep in mind that you may need 5 to 7 grams of salt a day, which is you know it's a lot. It's not a small amount. And almost everyone is deficient in magnesium. Certainly below what I would call an optimal level. Even if you're in the reference range, and so you're not according to that reference range deficient. I would not see people in optimal reference ranges typically, even when they supplement. There are a lot of anti-nutrients, phytic acid, lectins, tannins, oxalates, all these things will block and bind to different vitamins, minerals, and nutrients and stop you from absorbing them. So a lot of people are getting low amounts of magnesium absorption because of that. I mean, caffeine will get into your bloodstream and strip out magnesium from your blood and strip it out of your body. So and it will also dehydrate you. So, drinking coffee or tea and taking caffeine, which a lot of people do when they're working out to give them a bit of a boost pre-workout, that's a perfect storm for cramps because it's not only going to strip your magnesium out, it's going to dehydrate you. So, dehydration and low magnesium is, yeah, you're just sort of begging for cramps at that point. So, if anybody's taking caffeine or coffee, tea, et cetera, like that, I always tell them you need to be on a supplement because I see so many people when they go on carnivore, everybody starts off below an optimal range, I would say. But then it comes up. It can take months and months and months to come up, even with optimal nutrition. But when they're drinking coffee and tea and using caffeine, I see it, it's very difficult for them to get into optimal range even with supplementation. I almost never do. Strictest medical definition, fructose is a drug, whether we consider that a drug or not. I mean, we've had cocaine and laudanum and morphine, things like that. You could go to the drugstore and buy these drugs. You didn't need a prescription for a lot of these things for a long time. And